Welcome to an emergency Meet the Farmers, the Big Debate podcast.
The more I think the Farm Profitability Review offers that chance for a reset, doesn't it?
30% is mega. Is it achievable? We don't know, but actually having a target is great.
This report almost feels like it should have been what we did post-Brexit.
The British brand really resonates, and we have a fantastic story to tell.
Hello and welcome to an emergency Meet the Farmers, the Big Debate podcast. I've always wanted to say that since we've started doing our podcast, we actually have an official emergency podcast because the Farm Profitability Review by Minette Batters has been finally, and they have dragged their feet, released. This report was commissioned on the 7th of April to try and give a review into farm profitability going forward, and it's been done by Minette Batters. It has literally been released an hour and a half ago. It is 155 pages long, so we have not been able to read all of it, but this is going to be a very initial take on some of the overriding views of Minette's report. I'm very excited to say that we've got Ben Briggs, who is an agricultural communications expert. He's also an associate director of Pinstone and former editor of the Farmer's Guardian, a proper journalist to help us get into the initial fact. Hi, Ben.
Hi guys. Yeah, I think that's the longest intro I've ever had. Maybe even longer than it's taken for the Farm Profitability Review to come out.
Not that long.
Not that long. No. Which we thought was going to drop earlier this year, but has been kept until after the budget. Thankfully, hasn't come out as we did fear on Christmas Eve for a bit of Christmas festive reading. But it's now out in the open, and Minette's findings are going to be there for us all to digest over the next month or so.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to give us something to do in between Christmas and New Year. I think that actually getting back to the background of why she was asked to do this report, I think government were aware, we can think they're aware, that farm profitability in England was deteriorating. So they commissioned this report to try and understand why and how, despite farmers being asked to deliver more and more food security, climate and biodiversity, rural resilience. Simple question is really, how can farming be more profitable while still delivering food, environmental outcomes and public value? And why was she asked to lead it? I think it's really, as you were saying earlier, Ali, Baroness, she's got a lot of respect. And also I think it was highlighted that it really needed to be farmer-led, because I think too often these things are done by those who don't fully understand the farming, and she's running a farming business as well as the other role she has. So should we start digging into it? How many recommendations were there?
57 total, yeah. It's going to be a big document for us to digest, and we will be doing a proper episode on this in January once we've had a chance to read, inwardly digest, and find some people that will be able to talk in detail with it. Ben, what do you reckon is the number one bit that you've read so far?
So I think you're right about Minette Batters in the sense that she is a great communicator within those kind of corridors of power. And I think that's what set her apart when she was the NFU president. She's able to speak the language of both the political classes and the farming classes. And I saw her at the NSA Sheep Farmers Conference at Harrogate about a month ago. And one of the things she was talking about there, and I think this is the overriding marker of the report, is about placing farming's economic importance right at the heart of the report. She talks about the fact that farming and farmers look after 70% of the land area, that we directly support 400,000 jobs and contribute £10.5 billion to the UK economy. But right at the outset, she's saying it's not enough to look at that in isolation. It's looking at the fact that farming underpins the wider agricultural food industry and ecosystem. And that supply chain, which is worth £150 billion to the economy and is 6% of GDP. And I think that's really crucial. And she's trying to position farming as that kind of economic powerhouse, which I think is all too often overlooked. We always hear it from politicians, don't we? That, you're only a small part of GDP. You don't really matter. It doesn't matter. It's not a problem where we bring our food in from. And of course we know it's a problem. Minette has written on LinkedIn this morning that when you've got issues like the war in Ukraine, you've got the increasing threat of climate change, food security is national security. And I think this is where the Farm Profitability Review really positions that. I thought as well, really interestingly, at the NSA conference, she made the point that, you know, if we don't value farmers, if we don't look at them in terms of what they contribute to the social fabric of our rural areas, we are going to lose out. And she made the point that second homeowners aren't there clearing the snow in winter or putting out the moorland fires as we've seen this summer. So I think, yeah, it's a positioning document, isn't it? There's a host of recommendations there for government and others to take up, but we know that the challenge is that a recommendation is fine. It's how we take that into action. So that's the big thing. And then obviously there's a raft of other recommendations and potential bodies throughout the report.
Yeah, I really like how she's gone about collecting the information as well. It's very apparent, you know, skimming the document so far, that she's gone cross-sector. You know, I was lucky enough to go to one of her sort of, I suppose, hubs, I think she called them, where, you know, it was very specific to dairy, but she had them across sector, across very regional as well, and how she got about the country across that period of time and collected information. And then, you know, she went across supply chain, used existing databases. You know, she's really done the work on this. So hopefully it's a document that will really stand up in government, and people can take some real recommendations from it.
Yeah, absolutely. She's gone about it thoroughly, as Minette did with everything when she was in the NFU. And I think it's really interesting, Ben, that first bit about farm profitability and making sure that it's considered in a much wider food sector, because her in paragraph 3 of the exec summary, it said when she's in the NFU, she'd always ask why farming was never important. And they'd always say it was 0.6% of GDP. So why do we bother? And actually, she's now flipped that on its head with basically her first recommendation, saying that it's much more than that. You know, there's 4.2 million people employed in the wider sector, and actually we do have to consider everything about that. Brand Britain, this seems to be a big thing, making Britain proud again. There's going to be one of those posters saying "We need you," wartime-esque. That's something that she seems really, really keen on. She wants to increase exports by 30% in the next 4 years as well. That's a massive target.
Wow.
And a big part of that seems to be this Brand Britain. What do you make of that, Ben?
Yeah, I think the Brand Britain element is it runs throughout the document, doesn't it? We've got things like the Great British Farm Advisory Board recommendation in there, which is to develop an ambitious plan around agriculture and bringing that kind of technical knowledge to the fore. But yeah, the Trade and Agriculture Commissions, how we supercharge exports. I was really lucky 2 and a bit years ago to be out in Texas at the American Meat Conference. I mean, you know, that was a dream. A lot of people in Stetsons, but it was really, really interesting to see the work that AHDB was doing with those trade attaches in America and how they were kind of unlocking that trade access to America, to Central America and South America. And it's fascinating. We have these attaches right around the globe, and the British brand really resonates, you know, and we have a fantastic story to tell. If we're thinking about, you know, the grass-fed beef, lamb and dairy that we can export, there is a real story to tell behind all of that. And I think that Minette's acknowledged that in the Farm Profitability Review and really wants to supercharge that growth. But to supercharge that growth, we need the kind of right faculties within agriculture and the wider supply chain, but also government needs to buy into that as well. But we genuinely, you know, I think we can become a bit tired, can't we? Particularly at a kind of a politically charged environment that we exist in at the moment. It's quite febrile in terms of that nationalistic element, but also, you know, the Union flag resonates around the world as a brand, and I think she's acknowledged that as part of it.
Yeah, it's so important, Ben, because I think that that most farmers wouldn't understand that work's being done as well already, like that work that AHDB are doing, you know, that brand development in other countries. It is actually something by her highlighting it as well and setting that target pretty high. I mean, 30% is mega, you know. Is it achievable? We don't know, but actually having a target is great, isn't it? in terms of brand Britain, I notice it any time I've been at any other country, how far in front with high animal welfare, strong environmental standards, all of these things we're doing over and above already. So I think the fact that she's highlighting that within this report hopefully will make farmers also proud, because I think some of this report is actually, we can feel pretty proud about what we do, and actually highlighting farming in a positive way. I think she's done a really good job of that within this report. Don't you think, Ali?
I think what she's done is given us a whole new set of acronyms to learn. That's for sure. I was just about getting to grips with the one that I needed, and now I've got 1,000 more. FARM is a particularly nice one though, because I can get on board with FARM as an acronym. But I think that you mentioned there the HGB, and she's mentioned that quite a lot already in just what we've read, without saying there's a little bit too much fat on the bone, saying that actually we need to bring the AHDB, the Agricultural Horticultural Development Board, the Institute of Agriculture and Horticulture, TIAH, and the UK Agri-Tech Centre, the ATC, into one place. And that seems like a definite sort of message to say they all do good things, but they could do a lot better, I think, is this. I'm reading behind the lines there.
Yeah. I would agree. A lot of collaboration, Ben, don't you think, needed?
Yeah, and I think it's, I worked for the Agri-Tech Centre for 12 months, leading their marketing and comms division, and it's a fantastic organisation with brilliant people. But I think what she is talking about is how do we bring that brilliance to the fore? How do we communicate it? How do we bring the findings of AHDB, UKATC and TIA and make them even more applicable on farm, which is what all those organisations are working really hard to do. But I think that is a theme that runs throughout the review, isn't it? Is how do we have a reset? How do we create the infrastructure around British farming to allow it to succeed, and to make sure that the organisations supporting the industry are kind of laser focused on what they need to deliver, and that can go for whether it's whether it's AHDB or those other organisations, whether it's what we're doing in what we've just referenced in terms of exports. She's talked about this kind of soil shot and nature task force to bring in new green finance to the sector, which really plays in with what a lot of the banks are doing. There's so much lending available now from that, from a regenerative or a sustainability perspective. So I think it's trying to position farming not as being a siloed industry that sits on the side and is kind of patted on the head. We have to put it at the heart of that economic journey that we're going on, particularly in it's nearly 10 years since Brexit now, isn't it? But post COVID, we live in a time of conflict in Europe. So how do we position the industry and give it the importance and the credit that it deserves? Because I think we know too often that farming it's maligned by policymakers. I think there's been a view for too long that imports are going to be the solution to our food security problems. But we've shown that with conflict in Europe that those supply chains are compromised. So how do we how do we put the emphasis on farmers and support them in the right way, both in a practical manner, but also at a political level as well?
Yeah, I think you're right there, Ben. And I think there's a real element of, and I was joking about sort of the "we need you" war poster type thing, but there's a real element in just the exec summary of be proud of what you do and push it harder. And that's something that I think we often sit back, especially like, I don't know, as a cereal farmer, but we're a price taker. We sell what we can when we can. We get on with it. Like is there a great deal of pride in growing, I don't know, 500 tons of wheat to go into a chicken? No, but if we can build it into something else, then there's this real element of be proud, do better, do more. And I think that's something that's really nice. And I really like the fact that she's mentioned something that I've been saying for a long time, is especially with all these environmental schemes, is that there's been a constant environment or food production. And now she said it in her own words, which is, it is two sides of the same coin. And it absolutely is. We have to make sure that they are treated as inseparable. We can do both landscape recovery, environmental schemes, environmental improvements, and produce food. And that's something that she has made abundantly clear. And I think that's really nice. And she's also said that we need to have more farmers involved in policy. especially in these environmental policies, by creating agri-growth hubs in river basins, or by having more farmer input into policy, we can actually create a sort of symbiotic relationship as opposed to what I would say a dictatorial relationship before this.
Yeah, I think those agri growth hubs are actually really important. We spoke a bit about them within the hub that she organised, how some it's sort of based on the theory of the cluster group, and some they've been very successful and others have been, very unsuccessful. And they've been also very reliant on one person leading them. And if you don't have that right person in charge of them, they've just dissolved. But I like the fact that they're regional, because even though we're one country, as we've seen this summer, this drought has been very regional. And so actually understanding what environment we're growing crops like you, Ali, or dairy like me, it is very specific to your region, but then also linking those up in a national way as well. But also she spoke a lot about rewarding farmers for their time. And because a lot of these cluster groups were set up by people who just gave their time, but actually rewarding the farmer for their time and their advice, because we are experts on our own farm and within our own region, and massively incentivizing that, so that farmers feel valued. I think there's been a lot of fragmented support. We've seen the SFI, but we've also seen in and outs of other policy. And I think this link up would be really helpful. And I think empowering farmers it's just something that we've not been very good at within the UK. So I think an actual support network, whether that's to do with policy, whether it's to do with mitigating weather, all of those things would be super helpful. And I like the way she's gone about that.
I think one of the issues as well, Sophie, is that we've been in a policy muddle as well, haven't we, for the 10 years since Brexit. I mean, I think we had a chance in that kind of post-EU landscape to do something really good, but we've continued to move the goalposts for farmers. I think I speak to a lot of farmers who, they're skeptical about engaging with those environmental schemes. They maybe feel it's too much bureaucracy, or it's going to undermine their role as a food producer. And particularly if you look, to the uplands, where there's a real fear that they're just simply going to become, park keepers and that kind of thing. So how do you incentivize farmers to get actively involved in those environment schemes and feel like they are, a key economic driver is absolutely key. And the more we talk about it, the more I think the Farm Profitability Review offers that chance for a reset, doesn't it? Both in terms of the mindset of the industry, but crucially at a policy level as well. And you've just got to hope that what what Minette has recommended isn't just kind of, swept under the carpet within Westminster, because that is the worst thing that the Labour government could do at the moment, particularly given their relationship with the industry as it stands.
Do you think, Ben, that adding farmers to DEFRA is going to be, so for policy particularly, whether it's through these agri-growth hubs, do you think they are open to that? Or do you think they've got it right? Because obviously we talk a lot about politics and everything else, but actually it's the civil servants that are the life source of everything that's created. The politicians are the head of the tree. They're the ones that fall when it all goes wrong. But actually, like your Sandy Capilas, your Janet Hugheses, who have been there and now gone and been moved on, from all I can gather, like those are the people that are there to make policy. Those are the people that feel like they wanted to be involved with farmers. I haven't heard of the new generation of your Janets. And I wonder whether that's because they were waiting for this review, or whether actually they think they've got it right and they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ali. I mean, it's that issue, isn't it, that whoever your figurehead is at DEFRA is ultimately is that kind of figurehead, and you can have somebody like Michael Gove who, probably put DEFRA on a kind of gave it a higher prominence and status than a lot of DEFRA secretaries. He was the architect of a lot of the green policy that we see now, but you've had others throughout that. But the consistent thing, as you say, has been the civil servants within it. Janet Hughes was hugely collaborative and well thought of within the industry. So I think bringing farmers into that discussion is key. I mean, whether farmers, some farmers probably won't realise the level of bureaucracy they're about to go into, but I think getting farmers as part of that discussion is absolutely key. And I think it is key also within the context that DEFRA and other government departments are seeing their funding cut. Their resources are being pared back to the bone. So I think they are going to look to industry more for leadership and for guidance. And maybe this is an opportunity to get those kind of farmer views within that kind of political arena. It's just how that mechanism works, and whether really, the farmers within it feel that they're going to be adding value. Because it is one thing to be Minette Batters, isn't it? And this, because she is genuinely brilliant at that kind of the political game, and it is a game, but it's whether we can get those other trusted voices into that arena as well.
Absolutely. And I think that one that really stood out to me was that recommendation 24, which talks around championing British food, but also connecting the dots a lot more. So, like, we produce some amazing food in the UK, but actually procurement can be a barrier. So that is local procurement, but also that is national procurement, and how we can sort of champion what we're doing. Ask DEFRA whether they can establish something. I think she talked about food and drink England. I love how she's using, very national, very patriotic, doesn't it? But I think maybe that's what we need. And I don't think we are using probably enough of what we do. And so I think it would be great if we could get on board with that recommendation. She's compared it to Ireland's Cheggers board, but I think that I like the fact that we were saying, weren't we, that she's actually used international examples that have worked well, that we could actually look at and bring back, because I think we have produced some amazing food, and we will continue to produce some amazing food that could be used within our own country.
The Irish example, Sophie, is a great one, isn't it? With Choggers, or however you pronounce it.
Never know how to say it.
That is really at the heart of the Irish export success story. It is it's the engine room of that Irish brand. And if you look at what Ireland's done, particularly on the dairy front, I mean, the fact that Kerrygold milk powder is, it is literally all over the world, isn't it? So how do we learn from other countries? How do we bring that element in where we're bringing together research and technical knowledge and all this kind of context around how we drive British farming forward and really make it the kind of the powerhouse that it needs to be. But also, the thorny thing in this is, how is that going to land with the retailers? Because we know that the retailers within the food supply system in this country, they are cutthroat, and they hold all the power. So to a cereals perspective, Ali, we know that people are price takers, aren't they? They're not price makers, because of the power within that retail supply chain. So, I mean, we have to also seek to tackle that inequity, and hopefully this allows that conversation to go forward.
Yeah, and that's going to be something that's obviously we'll look at more in January. But it's the case of, like you say, it's really nice to have Baroness's words on paper, and we see thousands of documents, especially as you've said there, the bureaucracy within government. They're very good at creating paperwork, making sure that we actually action something, the government can action something, and the key points that they'll take away, because they're not going to like all of this. I'm sure they've been dwelling on it, hence why it's been delayed so long. There's a lot of stuff in here that is suggesting already, and we again haven't read through the full document, that there's a lot of work to be done. I'm not sure the civil service will like a lot of work to be done just before Christmas, but they've got to really act on it. Big thing for me is education. Sophie, you're the same. You've got your classroom. The fact that she mentions STEM education to encourage food and farming. I think that's key. I think that's it's going to be a small point in terms of everything else that's announced for farm profitability, but for future-proofing farming, it has to be at the forefront, because otherwise we end up with a skill shortage, or we end up with a farmer shortage, because we haven't had the drive to increase our education.
Yeah, that's so key, isn't it, Ali? And you're right. I'm a huge advocate for education and getting kids out on farm, but also like embedding it within the national curriculum, within that STEM piece of work, because I think a lot of children and a lot of teachers don't realise that farming can be a career for lots of different people. It doesn't matter whether you're from a farming background or not. But also she's put recommendations and support sort of mechanisms within that to support the next generation of farmers, hasn't she? You know, even down to the tenant section. I think it was recommendation 35 to support DEFRA to support the tenant farming sector to give them confidence to invest and grow their businesses. Well, a lot of next generation will be tenants because the access to land is, you know, pretty tough in terms of buying, and that we are in a country where we have, you know, nationally a lot of tenancies compared to anywhere else I go. You know, we're highly tenanted, big estates, etc. But the fact that she's actually suggesting longer term tenancies through the review, and I assume that she's probably had some interaction with the ROC review as well, which was highly focused on that tenancy aspect. But we have to think about that because there's no point to any of this if we haven't got the next generation of farmers, is there?
No, and do you know, Sophie, I think that thing around tenancy reform, it links into what we need in this country, isn't it? Which is to take a long-term view of agriculture, you know, whether it's at a farm level and being able to have tenancy agreements that are longer than 5 years, which some of them are reduced down to, whether it's at a policy level to look, you know, I know the NFU's got the 25-year farming review, but actually, you know, how can we get that embedded in policy? How can we get a long-term view for the industry that we're also passionate about, but that is often undermined by short-termism and by changes in policy? And I think Minette's review recognises that, and hopefully government will recognise that and put that into action as well. But we need to look longer term. We need to be aspirational. We need to think more ambitiously about British agriculture. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be sidelined.
This is the big thing, isn't it? And I think it's been the big thing. And this report almost feels like it should have been what we did post-Brexit. It feels like something that should have happened. We had an opportunity, and we're not going to get into the politics of Brexit or anti-Brexit. That's not the point here. The point is that we had an opportunity, once we'd voted to leave, to do something long-term and different to basically, which is what we've done at the moment, is bumble along with our European partners without being our European partners. And we've created SFI, which is different, absolutely. And they have, over the past few years, created, I believe, a good scheme that could be worked with. Then they've withdrawn it. And now, obviously, Minette is saying that it needs to be back, and it needs to be back in the next year for people that can't be in scheme because of this two sides of the coin, and because of the fact that we can do both together. But this report feels like that it needed to be 10 years ago. It needed someone to sit down, and it needs to be long term. It needs to be cross-party agreed. It needs to be basically above the government of the day. That's what it needs to be, because we are working with such long timescales, whether that be investment timescales, whether that be soil, especially on the environmental stuff, like the stuff that we are doing environmentally is a 20-year project. It's not a 5-year, it's not a 3-year scheme, it's not a 5-year scheme. To really make improvements, it has to be long term. And that is something that when policy changes so quickly, and when people can't agree, and when even, I don't know, policy is cross-sector agreed, cross-party agreed, then they pull stuff. It really just reduces any trust, which is something that I haven't seen mentioned yet. Trust within agriculture towards government is, I would say, at an all-time low. That has to be reinforced before you can start building these bridges to allow us to help create a long-term policy and a long-term strategy.
You know, as we're going into Christmas now, on the other side of it, it's just such an important piece of work to highlight the positivity that farming brings, but also to understand that we need the right support. You know, I think she's very good with words, Minette, and I think, you know, she's got a lot of respect. I like her at IHT, you know, she must have had to really hold back on that piece because it's so topical within our community, whether you're a tenant farmer or farmer owned, or, you know, it impacts completely down the supply chain. But she references that she couldn't not write about it, and it has made in my what does she say? It has been made clear in my terms of reference that it is not for me to offer proposals to the government on IHT. However, I could not write this report without referencing it. So
it
it's
sounds
just,
like she's got her arms tied behind her back as she said
slightly,
that.
yes.
She
That's
snuck
what I
it
love
in
about
after the
her,
final
is
edit.
that she absolutely could not get that in there. So she understands the sector completely, and so they've got the right person in there because she's willing to push those boundaries. Because we didn't want someone to go in there and sort of just do what the government, give the government what they want to hear. So I feel like the right person has done this report, absolutely. And we can have, we talk about trust within government to farmers and the other way around. But we have, and I think most farmers have a lot of trust in her to have the right, the right recommendations. But there's so much of it. I mean, how do we even cover it within this today, this morning, having had an hour and a half to have a look at it? We can't get the full details, but I'm really looking forward to delving more into it in January.
I think it's going to be a series, not an episode at this rate. There is so much, but that's good. That has to be good. It has to be good that there are 57 points in total, but then pages and pages of it. I think that the other thing to take away has obviously been this access to seasonal workers. That's been something that has been, especially around in my area, where there's a lot of horticulture, there's a lot of fruit. They're going to almost look into that and change it from 9 months to 12 months, because realistically, under polytunnels, in glass houses, cabbages, we run a 365 business. Agriculture is 365, 24/7. People are always going to want fresh food on the table, and I think it's important that we realise that we do need access to labour. And I think it's nice that they reference the fact that we will need access to seasonal foreign labour that will actually go and stand in a field and pick cabbages for 8 hours a day in November in the pouring rain, because sadly within our own population we struggle to do that. So I think that it's nice that she's referenced that, and I think there has been some sort of agreement on that going forward.
She's definitely delved into every sector, is what I'm hearing from that, Ali, is that she, there's no sector within agriculture she hasn't, unturned. I think that whole the productivity farming, we have had lots of grants as a sector, dairy, I will just say, but they haven't actually been that accessible to other sectors. We've been pretty lucky, but actually the size of them has been pretty large, that smaller scale farmers haven't been able to access them. So I like that she's highlighted that, because to drive our sector forward, we probably do need to invest, but we all need to have access to be able to invest, if that makes sense. There's been a lot of minimums, and I think she's talking about taking those out and sort of pushing the sector forward through innovation. But that needs to be across sector.
And making sure that it's available to active farmers. That's something that she's written about a lot, making sure that the people that get the money for grants are active farmers. And it goes back to that active farmer you had to tick before you get your BPS, that you were ticking all the boxes, and it was a dance around for landlords back in the day to make sure that they could get their own BPS, and making sure that is reinforced so that the right people are getting access to the grants, I think is crucial. Also, just from an arable point of view, there's a bit about pulse payments again, like we used to have back in the old CAP days, because homegrown protein, I still believe, is going to be hugely important. I believe it's one of the biggest importances for particularly livestock farmers and carbon footprints. So there's a nod back towards that sort of pulse element, but yeah, I guess it's oh God, we could be here for hours, and that's just the initial document. Ben, if you were going to summarize what you've seen so far in the last hour and a half, what would be your sort of key back British farming points?
I think for me, Ali, it's about placing, as we've discussed, placing farming at the heart of that economic conversation, and really ensuring that we're getting the right support, both from a political perspective, but also with that wider support network around farming. And that is what I would really hope to see. I do think we need a reset about how farming is perceived and about how we drive the industry forward. And I hope, as we digest this over the Christmas period and look again at the start of next year, that it can really be the platform for growth and a change in the fortunes of the industry. I think you're right to say that, the relationship with government, between farming and government, is at an all-time low. We need a reset on every front, and I think Minette's Having looked at it initially, Minette's comments are really going to resonate, but it's how we put them into action.
Yeah, and I think that her final piece here, where it says, I conclude the Farm Profitability Review where I started by reinforcing my first recommendation on the importance of valuing farming properly. That's the key takeaway, isn't it? It's making sure that we value the fact that farming is not just us with boots on the ground. It's the wider food industry. It's the wider health industry. It's so much more than four of us wandering around with wellies on, looking after livestock and crops, and making sure that that is part of the conversation when we talk about how much GDP, which is always what it goes back to when it comes to spend on from a government's point of view. If it's 0.6%, as they often quote, which is just pure farming, then it's irrelevant. However, when suddenly you put it into the wider industry, it becomes a much more relevant and very important topic.
I think that's a great point to conclude on. It's been brilliant to catch up with both of you on this, and it's such a hot topic. I'm looking forward to seeing the media unfold about it and us to properly delve into it in January. But wishing you all a very Merry Christmas. Thank you, Ben, for coming on at such short notice, and you, Ali, as well. It's been an absolute delight to chat through this with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This has been an emergency podcast episode. To have the former editor of the Farmers Guardian sat in a hotel room to talk to us as well is just what we needed to sort of get the initial fact. There's going to be so much more about this. We'll be covering it far more in depth in January. Our main episode will be out tomorrow, which we have already recorded because we didn't know this was all going to happen. So we will see you. Hopefully, we'll also see you tomorrow for our main episode where we'll be discussing markets and their place in the UK in the next 20 years. So please subscribe to the show. Any comments you have, make sure that you send them over, messages, direct messages, comments, or email is thebigdebate@ruralpodmedia.co.uk. Have a very, very Merry Christmas. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you all tomorrow. Meet the Farmers, The Big Debate is supported by UK top 50 law firm Birketts. Birketts expert lawyers can help you manage your estates, businesses and assets. From succession planning to environmental compliance, Birketts offers practical advice tailored to your needs. Whether you're a landowner, farmer or agribusiness specialist, the team can support you in achieving your goals and safeguarding your future. Find out more today at www.birketts.co.uk/ag. Meet the Farmers, The Big Debate is supported by TELUS Agriculture and Consumer Goods, the team that has brought together Farm Plan and Gatekeeper. Their ongoing investment equips farmers with the tools they need today and those they will need to face tomorrow's farming challenges. We're using their farm management software on our farm for spray plans, stock control, and much, much more, designed to give you complete control of your data and simplify your day-to-day operations. Whether you are tracking your inputs, managing costs, or planning ahead, TELUS makes your business more efficient and informed. Find out more at telus.com/big debate. Once again, that's telus.com/big debate.